The words hung in the air like poison, sharper than any blade could ever be. "She's useless," my father declared to the board of directors, his voice carrying across the mahogany conference table with cruel finality. My daughter wouldn't know the first thing about running this company. I stood frozen in the doorway, my hands still gripping the presentation materials I'd spent weeks preparing. The quarterly report I'd meticulously assembled suddenly felt like lead in my grasp. 28 years of trying to prove myself worthy of the Nakamura family name. And in 6 simple words, my father had reduced me to nothing. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs, some averting their eyes, others offering tight-lipped smiles of sympathy. I recognized those looks. They were the same ones I'd received throughout my life whenever someone discovered I was Hideo Nakamura's daughter. The quiet whispers would inevitably follow. "That's the younger one, you know, not the son." Such a shame. My sister Marie had warned me this would happen. "Sakura," she'd said, her voice gentle but firm over our weekly video call. "You know how father is. He'll never see past his own expectations." But I'd insisted on trying anyway, convinced that if I just worked hard enough, prepared thoroughly enough, proved myself valuable enough, he would finally see me. The memory of my first day at Nakamura Technologies rose unbidden in my mind. I was fresh out of business school, armed with an MBA from Harvard and burning ambition to modernize our family's tech empire. The security guard had stopped me at the entrance, assuming I was applying for a secretarial position. When I explained I was the new junior strategy director, his eyebrows had shot up in surprise. "Oh, you're the asterisk Nakamura," he'd said, and I pretended not to hear the emphasis on that. Now, standing in the boardroom's doorway, I felt that same familiar heat of shame creeping up my neck. But something else stirred beneath it, something that had been building for years, gathering strength with every dismissal, every undermining comment, every time someone had looked past me to find my brother Takeshi instead. Anger. I straightened my spine, squared my shoulders, and did something I'd never done before in my father's presence. I laughed. The sound cut through the uncomfortable silence like a thunderclap, drawing every eye in the room, including his. "Useless," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. "That's an interesting assessment, father, especially considering the blockchain integration proposal you're about to present to the board." I moved into the room with measured steps, my heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "The one that's nearly identical to the proposal I submitted 3 months ago, the one you called unrealistic and naive." The color drained from my father's face as I placed my presentation materials on the table. "But please," I continued, "don't let me interrupt. I'm sure the board would love to hear your thoughts on blockchain technology, though they might also be interested in knowing why our competitors are already implementing the exact solutions I proposed while we continue to fall behind." A heavy silence fell over the room. I could feel the weight of 24 pairs of eyes moving between my father and me, waiting to see how this unprecedented challenge to his authority would play out. The few allies I'd managed to cultivate on the board, mostly younger members who'd seen the potential in my proposals, were trying to suppress their smiles. My father's jaw clenched, a muscle ticking in his cheek. For a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes, not just anger, but perhaps a glimmer of something else. Recognition? Respect? Whatever it was, it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "You're dismissed," he said coldly. But I didn't move. Instead, I opened my portfolio and began distributing the documents I'd brought. Actually, I prepared an analysis of our current market position and the opportunities we're missing. Since I'm already here, perhaps the board would be interested in a different perspective. After all, a truly useless person wouldn't have noticed that our main competitor is about to announce a major blockchain initiative next quarter. Information I gathered through the network of industry contacts I've built over the past 5 years while everyone was busy underestimating me. Several board members leaned forward, interest piqued. Mr. Yamamoto, one of the oldest and most respected members, picked up my report and began reading, his eyebrows rising steadily. This was it, the moment I'd been preparing for since I first understood what it meant to be the useless daughter in a traditional Japanese business family. I took a deep breath, knowing that what I did next would either end my career at Nakamura Technologies or begin my real story. "So," I said, meeting my father's gaze directly, "shall we discuss the future of this company? Or would you prefer to continue dismissing the person who might just save it?" The board meeting that day ended in gridlock. with my father refusing to acknowledge my presentation while several board members requested more information about my blockchain proposal. I left the building in a daze, my professional defiance giving way to personal exhaustion. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Tokyo's financial district as I made my way to my favorite coffee shop, a small traditional establishment tucked away from the steel and glass towers. The usual, Nakamura-san. The elderly owner, Tanaka-san, asked as I entered. The familiar scent of freshly ground coffee beans and the gentle warmth of the shop wrapped around me like a comfort blanket. I nodded, sinking into my regular corner seat. As I waited for my coffee, my phone buzzed with an email notification. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another meeting reminder or quarterly report. Instead, the subject line made my heart stop. Urgent, data breach at NT competitors. The email was from Kai Zhang, a former colleague who now worked in cybersecurity consulting. We'd stayed in touch after graduate school, occasionally sharing industry insights, but this was different. Major security vulnerability discovered in Standard Tech's blockchain implementation. The email read, "Their entire system is compromised. They're trying to keep it quiet, but this affects their whole network. Thought you should know, given your interest in blockchain security." My hands trembled as I read the technical details Kai had attached. Standard Tech, our largest competitor, had rushed their blockchain integration, prioritizing speed over security. They'd made exactly the kind of mistakes I'd warned about in my proposal, the one my father had dismissed as naive. The implications hit me like a thunderbolt. Standard Tech's vulnerability wasn't just a security issue, it was a fundamental flaw in their approach to blockchain integration. The same approach that several other major players in the industry were following. But my proposal. I pulled out my laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard as I reviewed my original presentation. There it was on page 47, a detailed security protocol I developed after months of research and consultation with experts in the field. A protocol that would have prevented exactly this type of breach. Nakamura-san. Tanaka-san's voice startled me. He stood beside my table, concern etched on his weathered face. "Your coffee is getting cold." I looked up, suddenly aware that the shop's other customers had left and the sky outside had darkened. I'd been working for hours, expanding my original proposal into a comprehensive security framework. What had started as a theoretical approach to blockchain integration had evolved into something far more valuable. A solution to an industry-wide vulnerability that nobody else had anticipated. "Tanaka-san," I said slowly, "do you remember what you told me when I first started coming here? About how your wife proved everyone wrong when they said a woman couldn't run a traditional coffee shop?" He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Ah yes. She showed them that sometimes the best way to preserve tradition is to know exactly when to break it." The truth of those words resonated with my current situation. I had spent years trying to prove myself within the traditional constraints of Nakamura Technologies, playing by rules designed to keep me in my place. But now, for the first time, I saw a different path forward. My phone buzzed again. Another email from Kai. More companies affected. This could be industry-wide by next week. I closed my laptop, gathered my things, and stood up. The certainty of my next steps filled me with a strange calm, even as my mind raced with possibilities. I had something nobody else had, a solution to a crisis they didn't even know was coming. "Thank you for the coffee, Tanaka-san," I said, bowing slightly. "I think I finally understand what your wife meant." As I stepped out into the Tokyo night, my phone rang. It was Mary, probably calling for our weekly chat. But this time, I had more than just complaints about our father to share. This time, I had a plan. "Mary," I said as soon as she answered, "remember how you always said I needed to stop trying to fit into father's company and create my own path instead? I think I just found it." The magnitude of what I was considering should have terrified me. Starting my own cybersecurity consulting firm, specifically focused on blockchain integration, went against everything I'd been raised to believe about my role in the family business. It was audacious, risky, and completely unlike the dutiful daughter I'd always tried to be. Yet as I walked home through the bustling streets of Tokyo, my mind was clearer than it had been in years. The irony wasn't lost on me. My father's dismissal of my ideas had forced me to develop them independently, away from the constraints of Nakamura Technologies. In trying to prove my worth within the system, I'd accidentally created something that could transform the entire industry. For the first time in my life, being labeled useless felt like a gift. It had given me the freedom to explore possibilities that would never have been approved within the traditional corporate structure. The realization made me laugh out loud, drawing curious glances from passing salarymen hurrying to their late-night trains. I had always assumed my triumph would come from finally winning my father's approval. Instead, it would come from proving him wrong in a way he could never have anticipated. The thought both thrilled and terrified me, but mostly it filled me with a sense of purpose I'd never known before. My phone buzzed with yet another notification from Kai. More details emerging. Industry is about to face biggest security crisis in decades. I smiled, thinking of the presentation still pulled up on my laptop. Good thing I'm not useless after all, I whispered to myself, picking up my pace. I had work to do. The next 3 months transformed everything. I secured a small office in Shibuya, deliberately choosing a location away from the financial district where Nakamura Technologies dominated the skyline. My savings, combined with a strategic investment from Mary, provided enough capital to launch Sakura Security Solutions. The name was deliberate, no hiding behind our family name, no trading on our father's reputation. This would succeed or fail on my own merit. The industry crisis unfolded exactly as Kai had predicted. Major technology firms discovered critical vulnerabilities in their blockchain implementations, leading to a cascade of security breaches. Standard Tech's stock plummeted 40% in a single day when news of their compromise went public. The business media called it the blockchain crisis of 2025. My first client came through Kai's network, a mid-sized firm desperate to verify their blockchain security before their shareholders lost confidence. I arrived at their offices carrying the same presentation materials the Nakamura Technologies board had ignored, now refined and expanded into a comprehensive security protocol. Ms. Nakamura, their CEO began, "We understand you've developed a unique approach to blockchain security integration." The familiar weight of scrutiny settled over me as I faced their executive team. But this time, something was different. When I opened my laptop and began explaining my security framework, they leaned forward, engaged. There were no dismissive glances, no whispered doubts about my capabilities. They saw only my expertise, my solutions, my value. The contract they offered exceeded my most optimistic projections. Word spread quickly through Tokyo's tech community. By the end of the first month, Sakura Security Solutions had signed contracts with 5 major firms. By the second month, we had to lease additional office space to accommodate the growing team of security specialists I'd recruited, all chosen for their expertise rather than their connections. The transformation wasn't just professional. Each successful implementation, each problem solved, each client secured strengthened something inside me that had been wounded by years of dismissal. I stopped second-guessing my instincts in meetings. My voice grew stronger, more assured. The nervous habit of qualifying my statements with perhaps or maybe disappeared. One morning, as I reviewed security protocols with our newest client, I caught my reflection in the office window. The woman staring back at me stood straight-backed, confident, her expression focused and determined. I hardly recognized her as the same person who had trembled in the Nakamura Technologies boardroom just months ago. The media attention began with a small profile in a tech industry magazine, Rising Star in Blockchain Security. The article mentioned my connection to Nakamura Technologies only in passing, focusing instead on the innovative approach that had protected dozens of firms from the ongoing security crisis. More coverage followed, including an invitation to keynote a major technology conference. "They're calling you the blockchain guardian now," Mary told me during one of our video calls, her voice thick with pride. "Have you seen today's Financial Times?" I had. The article sat on my desk. How one woman's foresight could have prevented the blockchain crisis. The story detailed how my security protocols had anticipated and addressed vulnerabilities that had cost the industry billions. It quoted several prominent CEOs praising the elegance and effectiveness of my solutions. The old me would have deflected such praise, minimized my achievements, attributed them to luck or timing. But as I sat in my office, watching my team work through complex security implementations, I felt only quiet pride. This success wasn't luck. It was the result of years of preparation meeting the perfect moment of opportunity. Even my critics had been forced to acknowledge my expertise. During a panel discussion at the Tokyo Tech Summit, a senior executive from Standard Tech publicly admitted that implementing my security protocols earlier would have prevented their catastrophic breach. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the industry. The useless daughter had become the authority they all turned to for solutions. The most significant shift came during a chance encounter at an industry conference. I was reviewing my keynote speech notes when a familiar voice caught my attention. Sakura. I turned to find my father standing there, looking somehow smaller than I remembered. His expression carried something I'd never seen before. Uncertainty. I saw your presentation yesterday, he said carefully. Your approach to quantum-resistant blockchain security. It's quite innovative. 3 months ago, such grudging praise would have filled me with desperate joy. Now, I simply nodded, secure in the knowledge that I no longer needed his validation. Thank you, Father. If you'll excuse me, I have a keynote to deliver. As I walked away, I heard him call after me. The board would like to discuss a potential partnership between our companies. I paused but didn't turn around. Have your people contact my office, I replied. We'll review the proposal like any other potential client. The confidence in my voice wasn't feigned or forced. It came from a deep well of self-assurance built through action, achievement, and the profound understanding that the opinion that truly mattered was my own. The label of useless had lost its power, rendered meaningless by the evidence of my impact on an entire industry. Later that evening, as I prepared for my keynote address, I thought about the young women in the audience who might see themselves in my story. I added a new opening line to my speech. They said I was useless. But that judgment said more about their limitations than mine. Previous sections remained the same. 1 year after launching Sakura Security Solutions, I stood at a podium in Harvard Business School, my alma mater, addressing a packed auditorium. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same institution where I'd once doubted my place in the business world had invited me back as a keynote speaker for their Women in Technology Leadership Conference. Success, I began, isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. The journey from being labeled useless to becoming a leading voice in blockchain security had taught me lessons far more valuable than mere vindication. As I looked out at the sea of faces, many of them young women at the beginning of their careers, I shared the truth I'd discovered through my transformation. The most dangerous limitations are the ones we accept without question. I continued. When someone calls you useless, they're not describing your potential. They're revealing the boundaries of their own vision. During the tea and a session that followed, a student raised her hand. Ms. Nakamura, how did you know you had the ability to solve a crisis that stumped so many industry veterans? The question took me back to that pivotal moment in Tanaka-san's coffee shop, when possibility first overcame doubt. I didn't know, I admitted, but I'd spent years developing solutions that others dismissed without consideration. Their perception of me as useless had actually given me the freedom to explore ideas they were too confident to consider. Sometimes being underestimated is a gift. It allows you to work without the weight of others' expectations. That evening, I had dinner with Mary at our favorite sushi restaurant near the campus. As we shared Otoro and reminisced about our college days, she asked the question I'd been pondering myself. Do you ever regret not getting father's approval before striking out on your own? I considered the question carefully, remembering the years spent seeking validation that never came. No, I replied finally. If he had approved, I might have stayed within the boundaries he set. His dismissal forced me to define my own measure of success. The next morning, before my flight back to Tokyo, I received an email from the student who had asked about knowing one's abilities. She had attached a business plan for a revolutionary approach to sustainable energy distribution. Everyone says it's impossible, she wrote, but your story inspired me to trust my research. I smiled, remembering my own moments of doubt, and wrote back, impossible is often just unexplored territory. Keep going. Back in Tokyo, I found an invitation waiting on my desk. The Japanese Business Federation was establishing a committee on technological innovation, and they wanted me to chair it. 5 years ago, I would have seen this as a chance to finally prove my worth. Now, I recognized it as something more significant, an opportunity to change how potential is recognized and nurtured in others. During the first committee meeting, I shared a principle that had emerged from my experience. Innovation doesn't come from meeting expectations, it comes from transcending them. Every person in this room has ideas that others might dismiss. Your responsibility isn't to conform to their limitations, but to persist until your vision becomes reality. The meeting room included several faces I recognized from that fateful day in the Nakamura Technologies boardroom. They listened now with different expressions, respect, engagement, and perhaps a touch of chagrin. But I no longer needed their validation. The true measure of my success wasn't in their changed perception, but in the confidence with which I now navigated my chosen path. That evening, I returned to Tanaka-san's coffee shop. The elderly owner's wife was there, preparing coffee with the same precision she'd maintained for decades. We spoke about perseverance, about the quiet strength it takes to pursue one's vision despite doubts and dismissals. "You know," she said, her weathered hands steady as she poured hot water over freshly ground beans, "success isn't in proving the doubters wrong. It's in continuing to grow even when no one believes in you but yourself." As I sipped my coffee, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The label of useless had once felt like a prison sentence, but it had actually been the key to my freedom. By forcing me to look beyond traditional expectations, it had led me to discover capabilities I might never have explored within the comfortable confines of approval. My phone buzzed with a notification, another major tech company requesting our services. But it wasn't the business opportunity that made me smile. It was the name of their project lead, a young woman I'd met at a recent industry conference, who had confided that my story had given her the courage to pursue her innovative security protocols. The real triumph, I realized, wasn't in proving my critics wrong. It was in showing others what becomes possible when you refuse to accept the limitations others place upon you. Every person who finds the courage to pursue their vision, despite being labeled useless or impossible, adds another chapter to this story. The sun was setting over Tokyo's skyline as I left the coffee shop, casting long shadows between the buildings. Somewhere in those shadows, countless others were nursing their own dismissed ideas, harboring potential that others couldn't or wouldn't see. My story wasn't just about personal vindication. It was a beacon for them, a reminder that the greatest achievements often begin with someone saying, "You can't." Because in the end, being labeled useless doesn't define you. What defines you is how you rise above that label to create something invaluable.